All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome aboard. My name is Laura Bolio, and I'm here today with Emily. Emily, we are super thrilled to have you back. So, in case you guys don't remember, Emily is our very special guest today. So, she was an absolute breakout star at our tax planning summit. And today we're going to be talking about streamlining success and how Emily leverages technology and workflows to provide scalable, high value tax planning. Emily is an Investopedia top 100 advisor, and she's a partner and senior financial planner at Archer Investment Management. So before we jump into it, yes, this webinar will be recorded, and we will also share the slides within the next day or so. Please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A, and we will get to them. We'll save 10 or 15 minutes at the end, and we'll get to all of your questions. And anything that we don't get to, we will answer in some follow-up emails as a follow-up Q&A with Emily. So with that, Emily, I would love to hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So one of the questions is, why is she here? Why is Emily here? I used to be scared of tax planning. So I am 17 years into my career, and the first 5 or even 10 years, I was kind of the go talk to your CPA when it came to tax questions. And then all of a sudden, I got the right tools, the technology, the processes, and everything in the last 7 years. That's been my favorite planning topic. And it's because of these repeatable systems that I've created. And I'm going to show you today just an example of how tax planning can create massive value. So I'm going to take you into some of the different tools that I use. Some of the things I'm going to show you today are how I use the CRM system that we have, which is Wealthbox. But the things I'm going to tell you about how I use it can be repeatable in any of the CRM systems that you have. I'm going to show you how I use Holistiplan with my clients, so both behind the scenes and with a client on a call. So I'm going to show you exactly how I do that and how that works with our financial planning tool. We happen to use Right Capital, but I know that all the different tools have very similar types of screens. So I want to take you through my process end to end, from how do I talk about this with a prospective client and get them super excited about tax planning too, down to how do I work with somebody all the way through my service sequence and continue to show that value to them and bring them a lot of value in that tax planning process. So that's what I plan to dive into today. And we'll take a look at the Q&A along the way as well. I know I've got a lot to show you, so I imagine that the follow-up email is going to be pretty hefty, because there's going to be a lot of questions about some of the specifics about some of what I do. But it's really just one person's kind of journey and process, and we thought that that would be helpful for you all to see.
Can't wait.
Okay, so I am going to first just share a PowerPoint here of the first thing really is, how do we talk about tax planning? So tax planning conversation, I just came off of a prospective client meeting, and almost every single prospective client that I talk to says that tax planning is really important or critical. So on our intake process, we ask people as they're booking their initial meeting, what's important to them? And almost every single person checks the box for tax planning. So in that initial conversation, the things that I want to make sure I'm communicating to that person is, what does a CPA do and what is tax planning? So what do we do and what don't we do? So as I take you through sort of my processes, I'll pepper in a little bit of that, of where's that line. But the best resource I've ever seen on this topic was the Kitces article about tax planning versus tax advice. So if you've not seen that article before, that will start to make you feel a lot better about it. And that is a piece of what made me start to feel a lot more confident in providing tax planning. So there are many parts of the tax planning conversation that we can support our clients with, and doing a projection moving forward, looking at future taxes and future tax returns. That is all part of tax planning, just like we are having opinions about what longevity is going to look like, or what interest rates are going to do, or what inflation is going to do. So when we are starting to look at tax planning, there's a lot of room of where we can continue to add value. I also like to gather tax preferences. So there's a lot of parts of the financial planning process where it's important to not make assumptions about how people feel about any particular topic. Tax planning is one of them as well. So I like to talk to clients ahead of time about their history with taxes. So I like to know how they feel about taxes. I recently met with a client, a married couple. This is for both of them a second marriage. And so they're kind of coming together later in life and combining their tax world, and she hates paying taxes. So for her to see, a trade go through where it created capital gains, she is just so sensitive to that. She hates paying taxes. And he has a much different approach to it. He said, we got to pay him, we got to pay him. He's very low key about it, perfectly fine with that thought process of doing a Roth conversion or taking a distribution now to fill up a tax bracket. So it's important to understand before you start to give any advice or even show some of these projections to understand, are they really sensitive to this? Have they had bad experiences before? So the woman in my example, she had an advisor who'd never talked to her about it before and would do a lot of trading and generate a lot of capital gains without telling her about it. So there's certain things that I like to understand about where they've been and where they're going with me and understand how we work with them and explain everything we're doing. Because some of the goals, my very first one is to communicate no surprises on April 15th, or I should say, probably minimal surprises on April 15th. So, what that means is that we're not doing a lot of planning maneuvers that all of a sudden give them a big surprise tax bill. So, it's communicating all throughout the year what the different strategies, planning strategies are going to create from a tax planning perspective. And if there's any trades or Roth conversions or charitable contributions. So what is going to happen on their tax return? And so I'm going to show you how I look at that and how we do the mid-year tax review for clients to help them understand what April 15th is going to look like. We also want to reduce their total lifetime taxes. I can't think of any other better way of saying this. Kendra Wright got on the stage at the Shift conference earlier this year and specifically used the example of how advisors use jargon like total lifetime taxes in situations with clients, and it might be confusing for them. I still can't figure out a better way to say it, but I like to look at the total taxes that somebody's going to pay in their whole life, total lifetime taxes, and how do we reduce that? So I have a really cool example of how I show you how I quantify that for clients. So I can show them the really big dollars that are going to change in their scenario if they follow through on some strategies along the way. So if they change how they're contributing to certain accounts or taking distributions from other accounts, we can quantify what is the big tax bill for their whole life and how do we reduce it? That's one of the big goals of tax planning. Reduce consulting costs with the CPA. So a lot of times, if people are just going to their CPA for every question and projection and just thinking through things, they're going to get an hourly bill for that. So most of the CPAs that I work with my clients, they charge for typical just tax preparation. And that's actually what most people are getting. But if they're asking for any proactive planning questions, CPAs typically charge by the hour. And where I am in Charlotte, North Carolina, it's like $200 to $350 an hour is what I see. So there are a lot of times that we can go into tools like Holistiplan and answer those questions for the client, that they don't need to go get a bill from the CPA. So that's a big win in my book when we can maybe avoid some additional fees from other professionals. And of course, it does make sense to consult with them at certain points, but there are a lot of times we can potentially answer the question. And one of the main CPAs I work with, what I'll typically do is I'll show you the scenario analysis tool I use in Holistiplan, and I run the numbers, and then I just send them a quick note and say, either with a 2-minute Loom video or just send a couple of notes to say, here's their tax return, what it's looking like for 2024. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what the results look like. Does this make sense? And he'll typically just write back and say, yep, that looks great, and doesn't charge the client. So I love that when we can save our clients the need to go to their CPA. And just providing some clarity and confidence in tax decisions. So there are a lot of things I don't know how to do. I'm not good with technology. I couldn't tell you how my computer works, or if you showed me the inside of my computer, couldn't even tell you what any piece of it is. And so I just have a mental block. Like, I don't want to even go there. I don't even want to learn it. I don't even want to think about it. And some people are like that with their taxes, but unfortunately, they probably do need to know more than that. And so it's providing them with just a little bit more information and breaking it down. So I'll show you in the tax report feature inside of Holistiplan and in the tax planning screens within Right Capital, the financial planning tool that I use, how I show clients and simplify their taxes so that it doesn't feel like this big scary thing that they don't know anything about. It seems more approachable. So that's one of the goals. And then I'm going to go into some of the tax planning screens. This is what I do in the initial conversation. So when I'm talking to a client in an initial meeting, I will show them kind of a sample plan. I go into there. And then the other thing they're going to get from us are client stories. So regularly, so twice a month, we're putting out just different samples of how we worked with clients and how we've saved them money on their taxes or future healthcare costs or how we've helped them evaluate a credit card. And so there are different client stories that we put out both into social media on LinkedIn. So if you checked out my LinkedIn, you'll see some of those different types of client stories. And we also repurpose them into the newsletters. So a lot of times when I'm doing tax planning for a client and I have a big win, like I'm going to show you in my sample, then I want to then broadcast that out to say, look at the benefit of what tax planning can do and how important that is. So that's in all of the initial conversation and initial communication with a prospective client is to show that this is an area that we're not scared of. It's an area that we can lean into. And it's an area that we have specialized knowledge in. And I do think that does help us win some of these prospective clients as well. So some of the different pieces that we use. So we like to document those preferences I mentioned. So their history, their feelings about current versus future taxes. So where do they think taxes are going? Do they have any biases that I need to be aware of? So were they always told that their tax rate is like nothing or really low in retirement? Do I need to kind of work against any biases or help them understand anything? And then documenting any of that tax sensitivity and a budget. So if I have potentially a little bit of a tax budget to work with, that's helpful to understand both for trading, but also for some strategy like Roth conversions. Also, it's providing education. So one thing that I learned in a Holistiplan webinar a couple of years ago is that most people don't understand their tax return. And so they go cross-eyed when they look at that 1040. And so I'm going to show you what one thing I do with every single client when they come in the door. It doesn't matter if they're a CFO of a publicly traded company. I work with two of them. And I will show them the tax return report, the tax report within Holistiplan, and just break down how their tax return works. And everybody is typically impressed with that. I'll show you how I provide the education in Right Capital of what their just account types are and the tax status, so how that works. I don't assume that everybody knows the difference between a taxable brokerage account and a pre-tax IRA and a Roth IRA and inherited accounts. So when I'm onboarding a client, I make sure they understand all of that. And then I'm also hearing and listening for different opportunities. And I'm going to show you how I tag those in the contacts within WealthBox, the CRM tool that I have. So I want to be able to pull reports on all of my clients and know who's in QCD territory. So who's 70 and a half or older, who's taking RMDs. So if they're designed age or inherited RMDs. So who is potentially somebody that could go into a category that I can provide some additional proactive planning for. And then I also add tasks for different planning opportunities within the CRM system. So I'm going to take you into that as well and show you how I leverage my team to help with some of the different tax planning processes as well. Because if you're going to provide a tax plan for every single client, you're going to potentially need some help. So if you have members on your team who are in different administrative or operational functions, I'm going to show you in our workflows how I leverage our teammates to potentially take up some of the work that is more administrative and allow me to spend my time on the analysis piece. Okay, so this is my last slide, and then I'm going to go into the tech stuff. So the tools that I use and the different pieces that I'm going to go into. So planning tool, there's two planning tools that I use, so Holistiplan and Right Capital. And there's a big difference in how I use them. So in Right Capital, in my financial planning tool, if any of you are working with eMoney or any of the other similar tools, you know that it's typically big picture. And we're just looking at kind of how everything looks, how all the financial plan pieces fit together. But in order to really drill down on anything current year, I needed an additional tool for that. So that's why we picked up and used Holistiplan, is to be able to have a nice view of their current tax return that doesn't look like a big scary 1040. Um, Doing the annual tax report, so running that again when they have their tax return done, sending an annual tax letter to the CPA. So I'll show you how I use that. And then the scenario analysis, which is really looking at more of a pro forma of the current year to understand how is the year going to look, so we have no surprises on April 15th. Show you some of the big picture planning tools. And then in the CRM, so how we make it all happen and flow is through our process. So how do we document? What workflows do we use? What checklists and tasks? So this is some of the secret sauce that we're going to be sharing at the end as well. So pull up the workflow that I use and the checklist that I use. We're going to be supplying that at the end of the presentation also in the follow-up materials. So no need to write all of my steps down. We'll be sure to show those to you. Okay, so I'm going to take you first into Wealthbox. That. Okay, that's what you should see now. So I have a sample client in Wealthbox. And again, this is just the CRM system that we happen to use. And most of them have all of these same features as well. So as I mentioned originally, for their household, I want to tag any strategies that are relevant to them because it allows me to pull reports. So in any area that you have a tagging system in a CRM or a way to identify certain clients, if we are doing proactive tax loss harvesting, or if they might be somebody that might do a 529 to Roth movement after 15 years of having a 529 open, these are some types of strategies that we like to have on here and part of their services. So if they're going to be getting a tax letter from us annually, that allows me to pull a report and say, here are all the people who need a tax letter. So that's one area that I use inside of my CRM. I also have task templates built. So any CRM can do it, but I have specific task templates for inherited IRAs. So making sure that we have a repeating task for our team to make sure that we're checking in on the 10-year rule for that client. Or if they're going to potentially have a mid-year tax review, I have a process for that as well. So I have some task templates that are set up if they are doing Roth conversions or QCDs or deduction bunching, or if they own a business, if we're looking at that a little bit more deeply, we're going to have some different tasks that we're going to have potentially set up, and the annual tax letter and tax forms process as well. So as you will notice, none of these are assigned to me. I have teammates on my team who can handle really the requesting of the tax return and uploading it into the system and getting everything set up and ready to go so that I can go into analysis mode when I work with the client. So if you're an advisor sitting there and wondering, how do I do tax planning for everybody? Potentially think about what you can delegate. And so one of the things I'd said in the tax planning summit was, people repeated this back, was you can't delegate what you don't define. And so that's why it's so important to have these workflows, because having these different steps for scheduling the client and requesting the data and getting the data to the right places and checking for certain pieces of data, all of those things can be assigned if you have broken out what each of those steps are. I am a crazy workflow person where I want a workflow step for everything. Like, remember to take a sip of water during your meeting. It's a way to then see how far you are in the process and what still needs to happen. And it makes a topic like tax planning a lot more approachable. And so we have different templates that are built inside our system to create various tasks depending on what their strategy needs are. And then we have workflows built. So I'm going to take you into this one in a moment as well. When we do get the tax return and we've run the report, we have a note template for tax return review. that we open up and it's already asking a bunch of questions. So this is my shortened version of it. I have a version on an Excel spreadsheet, which actually tells you where to go look specifically for information. So it'll say, go to the 1040, line 16, look for a value there. Go to Schedule C, look for this information there. So when I'm done with it on the Excel spreadsheet version, I can go and input it here. Or if I already kind of know where to look for everything, I just kind of type it into my note as well. And you can keep going in and editing this. So I then have it tagged for taxes. So if I want to pull any tax related notes up later, I can pull a report inside of here and pull every tax related note all together. So I can look at previous tax return analyses and I can look at any other notes that I put in here. So I'm basically want to just break down what's the important information from the return, because I want that in this version in Wealthbox, in addition to what I'm going to show you that I use the other tools for. And planning opportunities. So these are not necessarily from the return, but this is from financial planning conversation. So do we know if they plan to move, have income changes, things like that? What do we want to potentially document? That would be important for us from a planning perspective that either we need to plan for or we need to notify the CPA of. So we're going to share that information with you as well. Both the version of what ends up in our system, but also my Excel spreadsheet kind of version of it as well, of what to kind of check for. So pretty much anybody who's ever looked at a return can kind of go in and plug and play some information from the tax return into this nice little checklist that then makes it a little bit easier for me to then understand their scenario and how to incorporate this information into their return. That's another thing of the language that we share with our clients is that when we ask for their tax return every year, what we're doing is we're asking for that at one time. So usually right after tax filing, we're saying, please send us a copy securely of your tax return. We give them the link to do that. So we may incorporate this data into future financial planning updates. So I'm not saying to anybody, please send me your return so I can analyze it and get back to you today. I'm saying to them, get this into us so that we have this data on file for you for future planning updates. And so we also say that we are receiving this so we can incorporate this into your plan. So that's some of the language that I use to say that we're not verifying the data of your return. We don't have all of the pieces that created your return. We don't have access to the software that created it. So we're not verifying anything. We will sometimes catch mistakes. But that's really not what we're promising to do. So we're not their CPA. We're not validating their return or their data. We're just incorporating what we learn from their return into their overall plan. And sometimes we'll catch some stuff too. Okay. From a workflow perspective, I'll take you into here and then I'm going to pause for a second. So I think there's a couple of questions in the chat that I might be able to answer. So from a workflow perspective, we have workflows for everything. I like to do a tax planning deep dive separately from their kind of normal financial plan build and their normal financial plan kind of ongoing support, because there are a lot of questions that typically come up. So it used to be that when I delivered a financial plan, I delivered all the topics in a 1-hour meeting, and I would talk about cash flow and budgeting and debt reduction and insurance recommendations and estate planning and tax planning and retirement planning and education planning, and I'd cram it into an hour. And what I realized is tax planning really deserves its own meeting, and I can very easily take the time to then talk through the preferences and talk their return and make sure they understand everything. And so that's what I've decided to do in our practice, is to deliver a financial plan that has some tax planning inside of it, but also then separately go into a deep dive. So inside that deep dive, what I'm assigning to my teammates is to schedule that meeting, request the return if we don't already have it. And then on my team, I have a paraplanner who then can pull meeting notes together or other tax topics, data as needed. So starting the tax note to review the return, add any known sensitivities or preferences. So taking a look at any previous meeting notes and seeing if there's anything that I need to know about their tax history going into this meeting. Reviewing the return, so utilizing the checklist, and I've attached the checklist into the task. Run Holistic Plan tax summary, or the tax report, and drop it into Right Capital, which is our planning tool. So that's available for me to use in the meeting. Create a draft of the scenario analysis and Holistiplan. So I'll show you that again. That's the pro forma kind of process. And then we're looking at some specific things. So should we be looking for property tax exemptions if they're of a certain age? Have we modeled different contribution types in their financial planning software? They maximizing contributions? Do they have kids? Should we look at dependent care FSA? So different things have kind of come up over the years that I like to start to note about big capital gains in a house or loss carry forward. So we're notifying at this point our trader on our team, portfolio strategist, to make sure she knows what their tax brackets are and what kind of room we have. So there's different opportunities that we have plugged into our workflow to remind us to specifically look for them and document them. So by the time I'm involved, so all of these processes happen, and then I jump in and take a look at some of the opportunities. So I already have the tax report created. I already have a scenario analysis built inside of Holistiplan. I'm going to show you both of those. And then I'm able to conduct my meeting. And then we email the CPA with any tax planning strategies that we decided to implement. We stage their future tax letter in Holistiplan. So I'll show you how that looks. We task the client with any action items like changing their payroll withholdings at work or their contribution levels to a certain type of account. And then we just mark that the meeting is complete. So we've got a nice tax planning workflow that walks through the entire process that we use for that specific meeting. And if any of you work within workflows and have them rule your life as well, you can add all kinds of information typically in any of these systems that allow you to then attach to a checklist or add additional notes within it. So I see there's some questions. Let me check these out real quick here. So somebody asked about thoughts on obtaining the enrolled agent designation. It's not anything I've ever wanted to pursue myself. I feel that I don't want to prepare tax returns. It's something that I like to take it to this level and do the planning process, and I'll show you in the systems what I use them for. But that's not something that I've personally ever wanted to look into. So Brian, to your question, if you want to actually prepare taxes as well, you definitely want to pursue that EA designation. But if you have good tools and technology, checklists and resources like what we're sharing today, I don't know that that's necessary. Is eMoney fine over Right Capital? Yeah, I've worked in eMoney for years prior to working with Right Capital. They have very, very similar tools. I'm just showing you what I happen to use. The tags that I use frequently, so inside of here, I always tag if they have an inherited IRA. I want to know if somebody's within that. Anytime somebody is potentially QCD eligible or reaching that age, if they might have leftover 529s. So all of these tags are ones that we will use. Equity compensation is a whole nother beast. There's a whole tax planning around when to exercise options and how and AMT. I'm not going to get into that today. But tax planning around equity comp is kind of a subspecialty, and I definitely want to tag any client that has ISOs, non-qualifieds, RSUs that we need to plan for. And that's really helpful as well. I will be sharing the tags and task templates, so you'll see some of the information that I've shared today, as well as this is being recorded. So you'll be able to see again and kind of reference back to that. How do we make QCDs easy on the client and your team? So we put that in the tax letter. So I'm going to show you in the Holistiplan system how we notify the CPA that that's been done. And because we tag it in here as well, we also remind our clients separately from the tax letter that they're doing QCDs, because one thing I know is you can tell a client 50 times that we're doing a strategy that isn't as obvious to their CPA. But one, we generally need to just tell the CPA, and we need to remind the client that those are being done. And then we help process that for the client. So typically, we can take in that information into our system and send the QCD out for the client, or give them a checkbook to do so. And then how do your team members keep track of all the information they've requested from the clients to make sure they eventually receive the info from them? That's a great question. Typically within the workflows, because these workflows are open and live. So if this step gets to request tax returns right here, and Tanya on our team has done that, she'll open this up here and create a note to say on 7/15 of 24, we requested the tax return. And then this sits open in her open workflows. So she might have like 20 workflows open at any time. And so as she's kind of working through her workflows and saying, hey, it's been a while since I've heard from Austin, then she would reach back out and then note that she's done that. So we kind of know where we are because we have these open workflows open for every type of meeting that we're running for our client. Is there a reason you all don't do client taxes? I've heard of some firms that make it easier for tax planning services. One, there's room for error in that. Two, a lot of our clients already come to us with a CPA. We don't necessarily want to disrupt that relationship. And it's not a very profitable business. So CPAs right now, the amount of work and the amount of time that they have to put into in April and compared to what they're paid specifically for that work, doesn't always feel as profitable business. But providing this tax planning is something that we want to do and like to do. So that's something that we've chosen personally for us to handle. Are there any compliance issues as an RA to be aware of when emailing a CPA, creating a Loom video? We ask our clients if it's okay to do so. So we document that it's okay to speak with the CPA. We make that very clear in the relationship. So every year before we send the tax letter, we do also just confirm, hey, are you still planning to work with XYZ CPA? And are you okay with us sending that? So we also copy the client in on any correspondence to the CPA. And we're not providing any PII, the personally identifiable information. So whenever I'm discussing anything with the CPA, then I'm going to share overall generally what we're doing, but I'm not sending anything without the client's permission, like their 1099s or anything like that. So as far as just keeping them in the loop on tax planning, it's just very general kind of emails that happen. Do you start the workflow immediately after you finish the last one? So we do have repeating tasks. So the workflows don't stay open because we only have so much space in our workflows. If we had a workflow open for every type of meeting all the time, we'd kind of lose our handle on it. So what we have in here is these tasks that repeat. And so right here, potentially for my teammate Marty to potentially work on their annual tax letter, every single year she's getting repeating tasks. That's the little cycle guy here. So the things that we repeat each year, we are just creating that as a repeating task. And then we open up a workflow if we have a tax planning meeting scheduled. So as soon as the meeting is booked, then we hook a workflow up to that meeting. So I generally only have workflows open for the next 2 weeks worth of meetings that are on my calendar. Okay. We do not charge anything. This is the last one I'll answer right now is we don't charge anything separate for tax planning. That's part of the comprehensive service that we provide our clients. So every client that comes in gets end-to-end financial planning on all of the different topics, including tax planning. Okay, let me take you into some tools. So this is the first one, really, is CRM. It's just get organized and delegate. Those are kind of the 2 takeaways from that, is just to determine what each of those steps might potentially be and who can handle those and who can kind of have a repeating process to handle those. So it's thinking about your team structure and how that works best. So we have people on our team who handle the actual processing of any money movement or account titling changes or data collection or scheduling. Those things on my team specifically are handled, and then I handle analysis. If you're doing each of those things, it's still a really good idea to have your different workflow steps built so that you just know where you are in the process all the time. Every time I think that I can just build something without my workflow, and then I go back and look at the workflows, I've missed a step. And I've been doing this quite a while. So I'll go into Right Capital sometimes and just build a financial plan for a client, or I'll go into Holistiplan, I'll do the scenario analysis and do a tax review. Then I'll go to start close out the workflow steps and realize that I forgot to check for a couple of things. So it just reminds you to just check the ages of everybody in the household and check the possible strategies that anybody in the household might deploy, check their preferences. There's a lot of things to maybe think about. But once you move through that workflow or move through that checklist, it's really not so scary. It's just kind of setting it up initially. I'm going to take you into Holistiplan. and show you how this is part of kind of the initial process we work with, and then the annual repeating tasks that we do inside a Holistiplan. So again, this is also what just makes this a little bit easier and scalable is there are things that I will specifically go look at the tax return for, but most of what I need comes out in a tax report. And I think when we first started using Holistiplan, we were early adopters. I think this is like kind of the only thing they did, and they've had some really neat improvements over time of additional explainers and additional tools that help your clients break down their tax situation and understand their taxes. But this is kind of the main tool that we start to work with our clients is walking them through their tax report. So what we do is actually take you back. When I have their tax return, when they've submitted it to us, we go in and upload the return. So when I click upload, I pick which tax year the return is for, and then click next, and it'll let me select the file from my computer and upload it. Once that's done processing, you get a little processing queue down in the corner. It will pop up here under tax returns for the client, under their client household, and I can go right into this tax report here. So what it has done when it's processed the tax return, it's extracting information from all those pages and schedules from the return, and it shows it into one really neat looking document that you can brand with your company branding on it. So we then print a PDF, so we download this report and we put it in the client's vault. So we go through it in their initial meeting with them. But we also then give it to them as a takeaway that they can have, and they can even print it and put it with their tax return. So if they want to go back and reference anything, they don't have to dig through the pages to find out information. They have available information as well. So it extracts some information up to the top. So really quickly, I can look at what's their AGI, what is their marginal rate and average rate, so their effective rate. Do they have what is their safe harbor? So what should they potentially pay in taxes the next year in order to avoid underpayment penalties? I can also see really quickly if we've got some carry forward losses to work with. So if they're a brand new client with a taxable account and then they're coming in with a bunch of losses, we can then potentially start to work on that budget of what can we trade, what can we potentially get them out of if it makes sense to. So we can take a look at quite a bit of information up in this key figures box. I love this section here because clients don't know how the tax brackets work, so that the marginal brackets work. And so it's nice to be able to show them what is their actual taxable income and where does it fall into the bracket. And very clearly for me, I can see how much room do we have inside of that bracket before we spill over into the next one with the next dollar earned. So this person, for example, has a lot of room in this 12% bracket, which is a lot of room for me to play with. And so I love to see that really quickly here. And it allows me to just explain how they're only paying 10% taxes on the first $20,550 they make, paying 12% on the next. So kind of educating them about how that steps up. It's really useful to have this extracted in this exact way. I can also see very quickly what their income tiers are and how it impacts some of the different limits. So can they make a Roth contribution? Are they eligible for certain types of education credits or childcare credits or savers credits? So where do they fall in here? And so all of this information is immediately on here and color coded. So I can see where they fall, where their income falls. I can also identify, so on this, I'd get really excited about the fact that they have a 0% capital gains bracket. So we might want to potentially fill up the capital gains bracket. So that's one of my workflow steps is, do we need to potentially look at filling up income tax bracket, federal income tax bracket? Do we need to think about filling up a capital gains tax bracket? So especially if they're in that 0% bracket, that's really good information to know. I've also located some additional assets that my client has by looking at the summary report of their Schedule B income sources. So if your client comes into you and you run a Holistiplan report for them, and it shows that they have interest or dividends from 3 other investment firms, then you know that they might have assets there that they might not have shared with you. So it's also good for you to just match up and understand if there are any other interest or dividend sources, There's other schedules on here, so it'll show if they have maybe a small business or a rental property in an LLC or something like that as well. So that breaks it all down. There are additional observations at the bottom. So for example, so if you don't necessarily immediately know or pick up on the excitement about having a 0% capital gains bracket to work with, then this reminds you right down here. So you have observations that jump in. So it might suggest about converting to Roth. So if you are a little bit newer to tax planning, there are some guidelines down here that might be useful to you as well. So all of this gets saved and presented to the client, and I just walk through and explain to them where they are, where their income falls in the brackets, what opportunities there might be, and then that allows me to see some planning opportunities that I might move forward with when we get into more of the longer term, big picture tools like Right Capital. The other piece while I'm in Holistiplan here is I mentioned the scenario analysis. I love this tool too, because it makes it so easy for me to take a look at what does the current tax year look like. And so when I upload that return, so the return, the sample return I plugged in here was 2022. When I plugged that in, it automatically went in here and basically filled out and extracted the information from the return and then showed me what all of the different pieces of their 1040 and schedules looked like, what their withholding was. And then all the way down at the bottom, it showed for the year, this person had a tax refund. So they had 8353 come back to them. So when I upload a return, I can already extract that whole tax year. And the magic is then copying. So if I add a scenario, I can copy this 2022 tax return and create a draft of 2023. So this is something that I have my team kind of set up for me to do. But basically, once I copy 2022, which is known data from their tax return, copy it over to 2023 in this situation, I can then go through and update the things that I know about. So if I know that they got a raise, I can go in here and plug in how much they're making in this coming year. So in the current tax year, which is 2023. Any other assumptions that I want to make about maybe their interest increased. So maybe they've told me they have more in savings now, or they've explained to me that they've taken maybe an IRA distribution. Anything like that, we can go in and then update it and see what happens. So this I like to do with the client. So once it's all set up in the meeting, I will say, hey, we copied over your tax return. Let's talk about the information. So tell me about how your income sources are changing from 2022 to 2023. Tell me about, do you expect more interest to come in from your bank accounts? Are you taking any distributions, or have you taken any distributions from any retirement accounts? So did you sell any investments with some gains on them? Do you have any carry forwards, anything like that? It extracts that information and allows you to go through and play. Because when I first went into this one, let me take this guy back out. One of the things that I immediately saw was, well, if nothing changes again this year, they're going to get a refund. And so based on all the data that had been potentially plugged in, this person had a little bit of a refund in here, which in my brain immediately went to, ooh, maybe I can use some of that to either give them more cash flow now. So if I'm checking in on them in the middle of July and saying, hey, we've got through the end of the year, you can drop your tax withholdings for the rest of the year, potentially. We can see what that might look like. Or I can use that as a little bit of budget to work with, and I can play around with a number for Roth conversions. So how do I maybe eat away at some of that surplus? So in the system here, I can plug and play with some of the Roth conversion amount. And if they normally owe, we can just find out, do you have a budget to work with? If maybe you're okay paying another $10,000 or $20,000 in taxes or more? Or do you have maybe a refund we can use to budget and use some of that refund to help cover the cost of a Roth conversion? So it'll tell you immediately if you plug in a Roth conversion, what the incremental cost specifically just of that conversion is going to be, and then the conversion effective rate. So we're converting in the 12% bracket and then a little bit into the 22% bracket too. So that's in here. And there's a whole explainer that's a really big, cool tool. They have other systems that will show you how to do that. But basically you can plug and play with different scenarios about taking additional income or equity comp. So big RSUs coming in or exercising options. There are all different ways that we use this. And also with deduction bunching. So when we go in here, that's one of the things that we might look for is there an opportunity to have some of your deductions for next year moved into this year? So maybe bunching some of your charitable contributions or payment on taxes. Is there anything that we can potentially do to save some money here? And I recently did this for a client where just deduction bunching alone saved them $13,000 in taxes over the 2 years. So there's some nice value in doing that. And then the final piece that I wanted to show you today specifically is the tax letter. So there's a couple of places in my workflow that I mentioned this. So I just want to show you what this is specifically in Holistiplan. Is that I have the ability to create a tax letter that can go to the CPA and go to the client each year. And all I have to do is basically just pick topics that are relevant to that client, and it will automatically add it into the tax letter. So for example, if we're doing a charitable distribution from an IRA, it'll add it up here as a topic, and it'll automatically add it on your tax letter with some language on it, and it looks really nice. So basically I went in here and just said, yep, they have some 1099s. They're expecting some healthcare documentation, a distribution from her inherited IRA. So it pulls in each of these expected document areas here, and then I just gave a little bit more information for the client. So it's a way to just kind of really quickly tell the CPA, here's what happened in the previous tax year, and here are the documents that you should be expecting to receive from the client. So you should expect to receive a couple of W-2s, a couple of 1099s, and then maybe a charity receipt for a charity that they worked with. So there are all of these different areas that can be added into this tax letter. They're already created by Holistiplan. You just add a little bit of detail. So did they do a post-tax IRA contribution? If they've done that, my team has a task to go into their tax letter and just add it, because it gets staged and sits here all year long until we're ready to produce it and send it to the CPA. So we have the ability, if we already know some information, we can start to fill this information in and stage that tax letter for future use. So that's another huge value add. We get so many positive comments back from CPAs that are so happy that we have put together just information we already have about the client in the system. Right. So I want to show you a couple of quick things about how I use Right Capital and how this all ties together, like really fast. And then I'm going to save that Q&A time at the end and answer any additional questions that have been banking up here. So inside of Right Capital, it's a planning tool we use. Again, eMoney is great too. Money Guide Pro is great. All of those different systems are perfectly fine. I've actually probably worked with each of them. I happen to come into a firm that uses Right Capital, and a couple of things that we show the client is their tax picture over time. So just explaining what we see when we zoom out, because the client and the CPA, they're only looking at 1 year. So the CPA is saying, how do I optimize 2023 or 2024? We as planners are zooming out and saying, how do we look at their whole life and optimizing that? So I'm looking at their tax rate now and in the future. And I'm looking at how do I smooth that out and how do I optimize it? And how do I tell the client about it? So what I do is I share with the client what their effective tax rate is year by year, kind of moving forward, what that general landscape looks like before we start adding some tax planning techniques. And then we start to look at, there are some bigger long-term tools inside of Right Capital regarding Roth conversions, for example. I know the other tools do as well, where you can just look at if I filled up a certain tax bracket. On Right Capital, it's just showing you the different brackets of taxes, and we have the ability to just fill up a tax bracket and do conversions for the client up to that tax bracket. It quantifies one piece, which is how much larger their ending net worth might be. But it doesn't quantify the total taxes saved. So that's the last thing I just wanted to show you, because I think that that is a really neat thing that you can extract from most financial planning softwares that is hugely valuable to the client. So I have that in an Excel format that I've downloaded from Right Capital. So when I go into Right Capital, there is an area inside Right Capital specifically, and in eMoney and in the other tools, where what you want to get to is really the Excel spreadsheet version of the plan. And so in Right Capital, you're going deep into the summary and just looking at the year by year look at every single year, inflows, outflows, tax payments. So this is the type of screen you want to navigate yourself to and figure out exactly where this data is housed inside your financial planning tool. The one thing they don't quantify that I've just kind of done a workaround around is with their existing plan, when they came to you with their saving strategy and their account set up the way that they were, they have a big scary number, which is their total lifetime tax number. How much is owed if you add up all these years in this whole column, so all the tax payments all the way through, before they got to you, what would they have paid in taxes? And then when you go in and do some techniques, so for this one, I did some Roth conversions. What are all the taxes that they're going to pay in that scenario? So more now, so they're gonna pay some more now, have some pain now to save. Watch out, this is beautiful. No taxes later in their scenario. So what ends up happening is we get a scenario where after we've applied our tax planning, they're quantifying what you're paying in taxes in these future years. And what you basically just need to do is download this to Excel and get that data over. I promise this is the very last thing I'm going to show you. And what should be showing on the screen right now is my Excel spreadsheet mania, which is in the system. I got to the Excel spreadsheet kind of version of the tool. And I took a look at, before we ever intervened and got involved and started their tax planning, what are their total taxes? And in their lifetime, $17 million in taxes. So they're high income earners. They've got a lot of taxes in here, especially at the end. Look at all these mega taxes at the end. So this is without our influence. Check this out. When I ran just the Roth conversions, the proposed plan, they have higher taxes early, no taxes for a number of years, and their total lifetime taxes are $2.9 million. So by doing tax planning, by looking at the big picture, and then every year going back into Holistiplan and doing that scenario analysis to see the actual impact on that current calendar year, so there's no surprises on April 15th, we're able to save this person in this scenario a lot of money on taxes and a lot of money on Medicare premiums, because their Medicare premiums are based on their income. So if we've converted all their money to Roth and they've got no taxes and no income, somebody who is going to be paying $2 million in Medicare premiums is now going to be paying $889,000. So we're saving $1 million in Medicare premiums, and we're saving them a truckload in taxes. So that's what I want to share with you. It was a lot of information for a really short period of time, but taking the clients through each of those steps in each of those technology pieces are what help us to get there. And so if you kind of follow a blueprint of creating those wealth box tags and repeating tasks and a workflow with all those steps that then point you to running the tax report in Holistiplan, running a scenario analysis in Holistiplan, and what to plug in where, starting and staging a tax letter in Holistiplan so that we can inform the CPA and bring value there and save them on those CPA consulting costs. And also just have a really organized way to explain to them how their taxes work. And then that final piece, the big long-term tool, getting and extracting a little bit more data out of them to find out what's the impact of doing all of this. So what is kind of my return on my investment of time, of what type of benefit am I going to provide to the client by asking for their tax return every year and analyzing it and looking for opportunities? What is that going to mean for them? It is so huge and so meaningful. And that's before we influence them in any other way. So that's why I love tax planning. I love sharing those numbers with clients, and it gets them motivated and interested to apply some of those techniques that might create a little bit higher tax bill now, just to create this big tax-free bucket in retirement, and this kind of vision of their retirement that looks a lot different without these healthcare premiums and big taxes to potentially worry about. So I'm going to spend the rest of my time kind of answering some of the Q&A here as much as I can. And then as a follow-up, you'll be receiving the recording from today, because I know I flew through so many tools so fast. You're going to see some workflows, checklists. I'm going to show you the types of tags that I use in WealthBox. That was one thing that was asked for, so I'll add that to my list. And then some of the answers to the questions that I didn't get to today. So I'm going to just see if I can hit a couple of these. Do I have a hard time getting clients to commit to a tax meeting on top of an annual meeting? No, because I get them excited about it right from the beginning, and in their annual meeting, we talk about what we're going to potentially do in the tax planning meeting. And so there's a big benefit to them to go through that process, and it's a service that they're paying for and that we are providing to them. And I think it's a huge value. So we don't get a lot of pushback on it. And sometimes clients are more simple, and we've identified where maybe they don't need a full tax planning meeting every year, but we are going through and looking at the return each year and seeing how it fits into their plan. So it might just be something we cover in a smaller way in their annual meeting, and not necessarily always have a second full tax planning meeting for every single client. And then let me just find one more here. Would you ever review a return that a client prepared in advance of their filing as a way of double checking their work? Yes, but I'm careful about using any type of language about double checking, verifying, or certifying any accuracy in it, because we're not going to ask for all of the different pieces. I don't want all of those different pieces, their W-2s and all of that. We're just not in that business. And so what I'll do is I'll eyeball it, and there are things that we'll check just to make sure that it aligns with what we're expecting to see based on their plan. So we will take a look at the draft returns, but I don't give any promise of verification or validity to them. So that's where we'll stop for now. I think we're on time here. So Laura, I'll go back to you.
Emily, that was so awesome. There was nothing more beautiful than the very end where all the taxes went to zero. Come on.
Oh my gosh, I know. It's exciting. If anybody on here doesn't think tax planning is exciting, I don't know what excites you in the world, because that was really exciting.
That was beautiful. That was like the mic drop moment.
Yeah. So, and that's why we start with people, even if you're a high income earner, even if you're young, you're not too young to maybe top up some brackets each year or to do a little bit of planning, because getting to retirement, I give the clients this vision of arriving to retirement with a big old Roth bucket and no Medicare surcharges and all of that. How good does that feel? So it's painful April 15th every year. And every year I question my own sanity about doing Roth contributions and everything, but it's worth it. And the plan allows you to see the benefit of doing that each and every year.
I love it. I love it so much. Okay, one other thing that we see keep popping up in the chat is, yes, we will include the service calendar in the follow-up email along with all of the other assets. So you guys are getting jam-packed email coming your way with the recording, the assets, the presentation, all of the takeaways. So overall, tremendous presentation, Emily. Thank you so, so, so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. Such a value add.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, all right, everybody, thank you for your time today, and have a great rest of your day. We will see you soon.